Right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We might as well make a start. This meeting is being recorded, just to let you know. So, welcome to the National Pig Club, Managing Without Zinc Oxide. A little bit of housekeeping. Could everyone keep their microphones muted, please, unless you're speaking, asking a question, or presenting. Should be going on till 4 o'clock, but a couple of the presentations are slightly shorter, so we may be finished a little bit before that. It's being recorded. It's Pig Pro registered, if anyone wishes to have it on their record. And if there's any questions, either put them in the chat function if you want to get it down whilst it's being while the presenter's presenting. If not, at the end we'll do a Q&A, and perhaps you could just use the icon at the top to raise your hand, and then we'll come around and ask the question. So first up, we've got Sadie Douglas. Sadie will explain the effect that zinc has on the piglet gut health and how the gut works, followed by Emma, and she will showcase a study of an indoor unit that has effectively removed zinc. Phil will discuss the impact of water on pig health and practicalities and benefits of water acidification. And Lauren will wrap up with what does the VMD update mean for the industry and the reasons for the ban in the first place. So without further ado, over to you, Sadie.
Thanks, Pat. Right, I'll just try and share my screen. Hopefully that's worked.
Not yes, yeah.
Yeah, we're there. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so as Pat said, my name's Sadie. I'm a piglet nutritionist at Primary Diets, and we've been working at Primary over the last 5 years or so, doing a lot of work on zinc oxide removal in feed and what changes we can make to hopefully help support the piglet through this transition. So as Pat said, I'm going to give a little bit of an overview on what zinc oxide is, how we currently use it, how we can use nutrition to help with zinc oxide removal, and then just a little bit on our experiences so far with zinc removal on commercial units. So first of all, what is zinc and how do we currently use it in our diets? So you will more than likely have zinc in two different forms and two different amounts in your starter feeds. So the first is zinc as an essential trace element, and this is at extremely low doses at 150 milligrams per kilogram in feed, and that's a legal maximum, so we can't go above this as feed manufacturers. And this is required for a number of different processes within the pig, and if you do not include the zinc, if we don't have it at the sufficient level, then you can result in a number of deficiencies associated with stunted growth, poor FCR, and a variety of skin issues as well. So this zinc will remain in piglet feed post June 2022 or longer now that we have in the UK. That won't be changing. What will be changing is the level of therapeutic zinc oxide that we have. So this is in the diets on prescription, 14-day license at 3.1 kilograms per ton. And it's used for the treatment of post-weaning diarrhea. So a problem that we'll typically see at around 7 to 10 days post-weaning. This is the type of zinc that we won't be seeing now we're a little bit longer, we're 2 years on, and I'll explain that shortly, but this is what we will be working to remove. So when and how does the ban come into force? Well, the ban was announced back in 2017, and EU member states were given 5 years for that withdrawal period. So effectively the date which we would have had to remove zinc would have been the 26th of June 2022. Simple and straightforward. However, the VMD recently announced that actually, if we have QA approved zinc oxide in the supply chain, then we can use that up. And zinc oxide has a shelf life of 2 years. So effectively, what we have been given is 2 years to use up any zinc that's in the supply chain, which has given us an extra 2 years almost from the original date that we had. I think the key message to be taken from the VMD's statement is that they made this decision because pig producers have worked so hard alongside the vets to reduce antibiotic usage, and they do not want to see that usage increase, which is some of the concerns around zinc oxide removal. So that is very much the message that we're taking, that we have been given this extra time, we mustn't waste it. We don't want to be seeing a point in 2 years' time where the vast majority of the industry is unprepared and may therefore have to go in with high levels of antibiotic usage in the short term. So we really must work hard to make sure they're in a good position as possible. So a little bit of background on how zinc oxide works and therefore how we try and effectively replace it. So the problem that we have with zinc oxide, which I'm sure you will have heard before, is that it doesn't have one particular mechanism or mode of action. It actually works, we think, on a variety of different ways within the piglet. So it has been shown to improve nutrient digestibility, for example. It's been shown to have positive effects on the immune system. It can have a direct antibacterial action. It can improve the intestinal morphology, so actually the structure of the gut. As it can have an effect on the microbiome as well, the piglet's gut microbiome. So there are a number of different ways that we think zinc oxide may work, and that's why it's really difficult to just replace zinc oxide with another product, with one particular product, and why it really isn't going to happen. You know, there is not going to be that one silver bullet. It's likely that we're going to have to look at this very much from a holistic approach in order to manage our piglets through the transition. So I just wanted to touch a little bit on post-weaning diarrhea, because that's why we have zinc oxide in the diets, to help control post-weaning diarrhea. Now, what we see is that this disease will occur within around 2 weeks after, up to 2 weeks after weaning. It's characterized by, profuse watery diarrhea, dehydration, mortality, and a loss of performance in the pigs that do survive. And this is obviously our main concern when it comes to zinc oxide removal. Now, it's important to say that post-weaning diarrhea itself is multifactorial, so it doesn't just have one particular cause. So this diagram is actually from a paper which has looked to categorize some of those causes of post-weaning diarrhea in slightly different ways, to therefore help us to think, okay, how do we tackle post-weaning diarrhea when we have it on farm? What should we be looking at? So just to quickly go through, hopefully you can see my my arrow, but on the bottom left-hand corner here, we have what they have called determining factors. So essentially, if you have this factor present, and if you have post-weaning diarrhea, it's more than likely that you will have this factor present. That's what we call determining factors. Predisposing factors are those that if you have these present, depending on what they might be, then it's likely that you may have post-weaning diarrhea as well, so they can contribute to it. So that could be things like different types of genetics, passive immunity. So if we're talking about, colostrum access on the sow, weaning age, we know that's a big one. So if we're weaning piglets at a younger age, we know that their gut is less immature at weaning, and therefore they are more susceptible to issues. Anorexia duration. So we're talking about essentially the period post-weaning when those piglets don't eat. So the longer that is, potentially the worse or the more at risk these piglets are going to be of post-weaning diarrhea. And then finally, we have the contributing factors, which often we would say they're partly responsible. So they can certainly exacerbate, but often individually on their own, they're not enough to cause post-weaning diarrhea. And these can be things such as housing conditions, stocking density, the feed regime that you have in place, and potentially other co-infections. But what I would say is that this is very much multifactorial. It's often that you will have multiple of these factors at play. So it might be that there is E. coli, but there is, you know, a period post-weaning where those piglets are not eating, you're weaning really immature young pigs, you've got an inappropriate feed regime, and all of those together can contribute to the issue of post-weaning diarrhea. But I think what's important to take from this is that there are factors here that we can actually do something about, and that we can actually look at changing. And that's when we talk about a holistic approach to zinc oxide removal. It's considering a lot of potential things on farm that can impact successful zinc removal. So just to touch briefly now on what is the potential impact of therapeutic zinc oxide removal. So we know that actually, even in the absence of looseness or post-weaning diarrhea, we know that zinc oxide is a very effective growth promoter. So we see a benefit in performance of zinc oxide in a lot of situations. So therefore, when we remove it, often what we will see is worsening growth. Alongside that, we can see a worsening of feed efficiency. We can potentially see an increase in mortality, particularly if you have post-weaning diarrhea. We can see an increase in looseness, but what I would say is that looseness doesn't necessarily come under one category. So we have something like post-weaning diarrhea, where it really is, you know, profuse, watery, you know, liquid diarrhea, and that's coupled with high mortality, poor performance. But what we can often see with zinc oxide removal is not post-weaning diarrhea as such, but what we're saying is increased looseness. So the consistency of the pig's feces may change. They may be more kind of, you know, cow muck-like than a solid feces, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's having a negative impact on the piglet's performance. And that is certainly what we're seeing, is that in some cases you may see a difference in looseness, but it's not necessarily causing a negative effect on the pigs. And then, as we've already touched on, you may see an increase in antibiotic usage if you're having an issue with post-weaning diarrhea, for example. So now I just wanted to touch on how nutrition can help, and really emphasize that nutrition is just one part of the puzzle. There's a lot of factors at play here, and I'm sure that the speakers are following me are going to kind of touch on some of those additional factors that can help as well. So how do we feed pigs without zinc oxide? Well, the way we've approached it at Primary is really back to basics. What does a potentially challenged pig require? Because we know that if we're taking out zinc oxide, we know the process of weaning is very stressful, and it is a challenge situation. And that zinc oxide has allowed us to mask a lot of these issues for quite a long period of time. So it is very much going back to basics on how to feed these pigs. We know that feed can help support the piglet through the post-weaning diarrhea challenge and still maintain good potential for growth. We know that is possible, but it will differ on different farms about how easy that's going to be. And as I've said, feed is very much one tool in the armory for rearing pigs in the absence of zinc oxide. We need to be considering a whole farm approach to this. So I don't want to touch too long on these, but just a few areas of focus that as nutritionists we potentially may be looking at. So firstly, as I've already said, nutrient requirements under a health challenge. So we know that we can see a benefit if we feed piglets slightly differently when they're having a health challenge. And that could be things such as amino acids. We know that when we change those requirements, that we can see a benefit to that. We can also look at minimizing availability, nutrient availability to bacteria, and I will touch a little bit more detail on that in the next slide. We can look at trying to help modify the immune response in the piglets as well. As I've said, weaning is an incredibly stressful period for the pigs, and there are some methods that we can employ to try and dampen down that immune response, because it can have quite a negative impact on the pig. We can also look at functional raw materials. So often when we, as nutritionists, when we think about raw materials, we think about them for their nutrient value, but actually raw materials such as fibre have functions, and we have to look at them in a slightly different way than we may have done previously. And again, that's something I'll just touch on in a little bit more detail. And then finally, gut health moderation, which is a really big one when it comes to zinc oxide removal, and it's probably the one that we get asked the most about. But that tends to be, focusing on additives. Okay, what can we put in the feed to try and directly have a positive effect on gut health, to influence the microbiome, and as I've said, it's a use of selective additives. So very quickly touching on minimizing nutrient availability to bacteria. So this is all around crude protein, and this is probably one of the most well-known and well talked about strategies when we're trying to remove zinc oxide in terms of feed that I suspect most, if not all, nutrition companies will be doing. So what we have when it comes to protein digestion in the piglet is that mainly begins in the stomach of the piglet, and it needs an enzyme called pepsin, and that essentially operates at a low pH. But we know that the pH of the piglet's stomach isn't low enough, and it takes some time to actually get to the optimum pH. So what that means is that actually protein digestion in the piglet isn't as good as it could be, and what happens is we get undigested protein reaching the hindgut. That undigested protein is then essentially fermented by bacteria, by pathogenic bacteria, and it produces a variety of compounds that essentially will, really exacerbate post-weaning diarrhea. So one of the main things that we can do as nutritionists is try to reduce the crude protein level of our diet, so that we're reducing the amount of protein that is ending up here in the hindgut that bacteria such as E. coli can ferment. And actually things like synthetic amino acids have allowed us to do that, to try and maintain some of our amino acid requirements, but also lower our crude protein. So, have a lowering of soya, for example, in the diets. So that may be something you notice on your labels if you're trying a feed which is aimed around zinc oxide removal, is that the crude protein level will be lower than you're used to. The second one to touch on briefly is the importance of fiber. So historically, fiber, particularly in piglet diets, has been thought of as something that may be negative, and that it reduces the nutrient density of those diets. But actually, as we're really starting to understand fiber, we know that there are really big benefits, particularly with zinc oxide removal, to including different types of fiber in the diets. So what they can do is help to bulk up essentially the digester, like the feed within the piglet, and slow the transit time through the gut, so the amount of time it takes for the digester to pass through the piglet. And for example, at Primary, we have done a lot of trial work around the use of wheat bran in our diets, and certainly found that wheat bran, when it's included in diets for zinc oxide removal, will help to reduce the fecal score, so essentially make those feces firmer. And we also find that the graph on the right hand side, which is a growth curve, this top line here is the performance of those pigs with therapeutic levels of zinc oxide, so they have the highest performance. This green line here is when we've included 4% wheat bran in our diets, so a lot closer in terms of performance. And this is the same diets without the 4% wheat bran, so you can see a lot lower in performance. So not only is it helping us have piglets with firmer feces, but it's also helping to improve the growth and getting us closer to that performance with zinc oxide. And then finally, additives. So additives are incredibly useful, but the market is actually, it really is saturated with various different types of them, and it's important that you do your research in order to know which additives to include in your diets. Ones that you may come across in different feeds could be acids, for example. They're a really important one when it comes to zinc oxide removal, and they can have a direct action on the bacteria. For example, enzymes to help feed digestion. So if you've got a lot of fiber in the diets, to try and help those piglets digest the feed and extract the nutrients from it. You've got prebiotics and probiotics. again, which the aim is to have an influence on the gut microbiome of those pigs. And what I would say, it's still quite early days for probiotics and prebiotics, but there's definitely some interesting products there on the market. And then finally, essential oils or plant extracts, so again can have a direct effect on harmful bacteria. But just a word of caution, we've tried a lot of additives over the years, and a large number of them had actually no effect whatsoever. Actually, 15 of them had a negative effect, so but on growth performance and potentially on fecal consistency as well. And then 27 had some positive effect. So it really is a process of understanding what products are out there and doing the necessary trial work. And then I just wanted to put a quick slide in here about managing the wean pig, because obviously I'm focusing on what we can do as nutritionists, what changes we can make to the feed to try and help, but it really is thinking a whole farm approach, a holistic approach. So you need to be talking to your nutritionist about the optimal pre-weaning feed regime. You need to be looking at what you're feeding post-weaning. So is the feed regime suitable for the genetics that you have on the farm? Is it suitable for the size of the pigs? If you're separating by pigs by size, then you should be feeding differently as well. Potentially, it may be that you need to look at gruel feeding or something like transition feeders. And then you have a feed regime in place for your pull-out pigs. So if you do have a greater number of pigs that need pulling out after weaning, when you've removed zinc oxide, which you may do, then you need to have something in place to support those pigs. And then just some really basic things. Make sure that your feed is available at weaning. Often we may go on farm and see that the pigs are weaned and then the feed isn't put in there for, a few hours after. We're really trying to make sure that those pigs eat as soon as possible post-weaning. We really don't want them to have any reason not to eat and potentially, exacerbate issues with looseness. Maximize feeding and drinking space where possible. This can just be temporary. If you've got some extra troughs you can put down for the first few days post-weaning, this can be really beneficial. And as I've touched on earlier, just think about weaning age. Certainly, we've seen a benefit to weaning an older pig, but it really is thinking about what you're doing on farm. And if you do have a younger weaning age, then do we need to have a think about making sure that you've got the optimal pre and post weaning feed regime in place for those pigs. And then I quickly just want to touch on some of our experiences at primary in terms of zinc removal. So how do we do it at primary? Cautiously would be the kind of key message here. Every farm is different and will respond differently. Some farms are going to find that actually they can remove zinc oxide a lot easier than others, and we've definitely seen that. There are some units that we've managed to remove zinc oxide, we've changed feed, and we've done very little on farm apart from a couple of management tweaks, and we've been able to maintain performance, not had issues with looseness. Whereas others, we have had severe post-weaning diarrhea. So it really is, every farm is different, and therefore we really need to approach this cautiously. It very much should be a discussion between the producer, the vet, the nutritionist, and I'll add to that other allied industries. There are a lot of people out there with really good experience, for example, on, water systems or ventilation or genetics. So please do use those people, have those conversations and try and bring everyone together, because that really is going to be the way that we do this successfully. In practical terms, if you're not doing a controlled trial, and you want to do it cautiously, we'd probably start with the last stage diet, your last starter diet, because that's often the easiest one to remove, and then gradually work your way backwards. Always make sure you have a small amount or a amount of feed on farm with zinc, so that if you have any issues, you can use that feed, put that feed straight back in, and that should help to clear it up. But obviously we only have access to this feed with zinc for another, say, 2 years. So if you don't try zinc removal before the period that the zinc oxide is banned, you're not going to have this backup on farm. And if you have issues, then the likelihood is you're going to have to go straight in with antibiotics. So it's just something to consider. And then certainly our priority at primary is tackle the looseness first and then look to build up any lost performance. So as I've said, the concern is we don't know how farms will respond until we actually begin the process of zinc oxide removal, and therefore our priority is go in with a lower specification diet than we perhaps normally would do, because you're going in with lower protein, therefore the diets are that much safer when it comes to having looseness, and then we work to try and build back up that lost performance with our customers. So just a little bit of a summary, and we have kind of moved beyond this now, but last time we checked, we were looking at over 25 farms we'd worked with for zinc removal, indoor, outdoor, straw-based pigs, variety of genetics, variety of weaning weights, different starter feed allowances, from 3 kilograms right up to 9, different number of pigs per pen, mixture of medicated feed or plain feed, because again that could have an impact, and then a variety of different feed forms as well. And overall what we've seen so far is that actually in 75% of farms we've not seen any differences in looseness. So what we're generally seeing is that we can remove zinc oxide and not see any difference in looseness in 75% of those farms. However, in 12.5%, we did see some mild looseness, but not enough that it required any action. And then another 12.5%, we saw severe looseness. And I would say in these cases, we had post-weaning diarrhea, antibiotics were required. So it really is a variety in terms of what we're seeing on farm. And as I've said, until you begin that process, you're not necessarily going to know how your pigs are going to respond to that. And then in terms of the growth performance, now because of the strategy that we've employed, which I've already talked about, where we're reducing crude protein, we are seeing a reduction in performance in just over half of those units. And a lot of that is around, again, the reduction in crude protein, and we can work to build back up that lost performance, and that's what we do with customers. But actually in 35% of farms, we saw that growth was maintained at its current level. And in 12%, we did actually see an improvement in performance, and often that's via feed intake, because zinc is bitter. So in some cases we can see that when we remove the zinc, we see an increase in feed intake. But I really would caution that is a small percentage of farms. And as I said, we really don't know how each will respond. So just to reiterate, zinc removal is going to be different on every unit, and it is going to be multifaceted. It's going to need a holistic approach to do it successfully. So that is looking at health, so vaccination, things like immunity, so colostrum intakes of piglets, potentially antibiotics. From the nutrition side of things, the feed regime that you have in place, it may mean a whole new range of diets. Certainly that's the approach that we've taken at Primary, and then focus on your pre and post weaning methods to try and improve those. Then looking at different management factors, so weaning weight, weaning age, environment, biosecurity, which could come under health as well. And then, as I've said, collaboration. Please use those people in allied industries to help with this process. This should absolutely be something that we're doing together. And then also genetics. So certainly we know that there are best feeding practices for different genetics. So again, that's just something to consider. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sadie. We'll carry the question. We'll carry the questions over to the end, and then we can. We'll carry on that way. So over to you, Emma. Thank you very much, Sadie. That was really interesting.
Hello, sorry, just loading my presentation. Hopefully you can see that, can you?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Well, no, first of all, just want to say thank you to Pat and AHDB, obviously, for inviting me to come and speak to you today. I'm just going to spend about 15 minutes, 20 minutes covering a bit of a case study where we've worked with a producer, an indoor producer actually up in Yorkshire, to remove zinc from their starter diets. And as Pat sort of mentioned, you know, any questions as I go through, please do pop them in the chat and I'll do my very best to answer them at the end. So I'll just start by kicking off with a bit of a background then as to who I am and what I do. So as you know, my name's Emma and I'm the Young Animal Feed Technical Advisor at 4Farmers. So in my role, I work very closely, obviously, with our internal pig team, but also directly with producers on farm and our customers to sort of optimise feeding regimes and focus on kind of getting the most out of performance from that pre-weaning stage in the farrowing house up until sort of approximately 20-30 kilos. So that's kind of my focus area. And it won't come as a surprise to any of you, but over the last couple of years, we've really been working on you know, preparing our zinc removal package ahead of the ban, which obviously was coming into place in June 2022 this year, but now obviously extended. So I'll come on to talk a little bit about what our package is and what our general approach is. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, we've been working really closely, obviously, with our research team and our nutritionists, not only to provide, you know, that nutritional solution to support customers, but also to make sure that we've got, you know, as Sadie's just mentioned, all of those kind of holistic approaches and management techniques also considered. So I'll focus predominantly today on one particular case study, and I'll just take you through how we approached it, what we did, and what we've seen so far. So to start with, and again, I appreciate this message Sadie's just covered, and I think it's something we've definitely heard quite a lot in the industry over the last couple of years, but there isn't going to be, you know, a silver bullet when it comes to zinc removal. And because of that, as a team here at 4Farmers, we've developed a tool which we've termed as Nutricare. And that kind of looks at assessing all the different factors that can play a bit of a role in the removal of zinc. And I guess also it's probably worth mentioning here as well that the tool isn't just designed for zinc removal, because there will be producers out there that don't currently use zinc within their starter diets. And this can be quite a useful way of looking at ways to just improve piglet vitality and performance in general. So I'll just take you through what the tools do and what they kind of focus in at. But it starts with the Nutricare assessment, and that is a list of kind of questions to establish what the current practices are and what the current level of performance is, and perhaps also what the objectives of that particular unit or you know, business is over the next sort of 6 months. Once that assessment's been filled in, it will then generate a report and list the tools that might be worth looking into in a little bit more detail. So just to start with, I don't know whether you can see my cursor, but just to start off with then, the fecal scoring is a really crude way of getting a measure as to what the kind of the gut health is of the pigs on the farm, and that can be you know, a cross section of pigs at different stages of production, and it's a really simple scoring system from sort of 0 to 5 just to see where the current starting point is. As Sadie again has also just mentioned, you know, another important factor in all of this is ensuring that we've got good hygiene and we've got the appropriate environment. So this kind of covers off our climate check and our hygienogram, so these two tools here. So trying to limit the challenge in the environment, particularly to sort of your young naive pigs in terms of their immune system, but also kind of considering, you know, the conditions within that building are correct for the size and the age of pigs. So for example, you know, looking at the correct temperature and making sure there's no drafts. And as we've also just discussed, you know, tapping into the knowledge that's already in the industry, putting you in the direction of, you know, those experts to maybe investigate those kind of areas further is definitely what we want to encourage with this process. The Colostrum Score, this is an assessment of colostrum intake, really. So we take a selection of piglets across different litters, and that gives us an indication as to what the intakes are like, whether that's even across the litter, you know, whether that's of adequate levels in general. And then allowing us to sort of implement any support or changes to sort of nutrition. The Piglet Vitality check, so this one at the top here. So as the name suggests, that's very much looking at Piglet Vitality, so measuring birth weights of piglets across a selection of litters, different parities, again to see whether that's an area we can help improve. Water check, so I know Phil's going to come on and talk to you a little bit about the importance of water, but that's just obviously making sure that there's the availability and the quality there. So in addition to that, we also want to include that, well, we also value the use of acidification products, so the benefits of organic acids for gut health as well. And finally, something that isn't on this slide, but obviously plays a really significant role is the nutritional aspect. And I'll touch a little bit on our approach for that. So yeah, multifaceted, no silver bullet for the solution, but we are, as Sadie says, trying to encourage people to engage with their vets, other members of the industry, to try and help support with the removal of zinc. So another sort of added benefit is we obviously work sort of internationally, and because of that, we're definitely drawing on the experiences of other countries, other customers that are obviously at different stages of their zinc removal journey, I guess. So not only are we able to sort of tap into those learnings, but over the last couple of years, we've certainly tried to take those and also test our UK specific approach as well. So a lot of these learnings we're already implementing on farm on a regular basis. To name a couple would be promoting pre-weaning intakes as much as possible, making sure obviously we've got good access to water. We're trying to maintain that consistent nutrition pre and immediately post-weaning, limiting the changes, and also looking at sort of management techniques, whether that's putting a gruel down, providing electrolytes immediately post-weaning as well. So trying to pull out all of these added practices will obviously help support further. So nutrition is a key part of the puzzle, really. So as I've just mentioned, we've developed a specific set of diets really dedicated to the removal of zinc. And I think a lot of that focus has really been on sort of supporting gut health as much as possible. So we've looked at like the raw material compositions of the diets. We've obviously made sure that they include easily digestible raw materials and nutrients. And that's really sort of aiming to reduce the dietary protein and amino acids, or making sure that obviously excess of that isn't going undigested, reaching the hindgut, and then obviously causing the gut upsets that we've just heard about. We've also added, unique blend of acids, nutrient kinetics in the formulation, and also probiotics to reference just a couple of features of these diets. The other thing that I was just going to mention is that we have introduced these diets that probably sit as like a first stage starter. So we tend to use them, just before weaning. So again, we try and encourage standard practice to introduce the post-weaning diet a couple of days prior to weaning and up to about 7 days post-weaning. But again, the application and the feeding regime is very unit specific. And I think the other sort of consideration the other consideration is obviously the use of medication, what the objectives or what the targets are for that particular unit as to how we would then position these diets within an existing regime or potentially a new one. Yeah, and I think it's probably a reoccurring message we're going to hear in all three probably presentations or 4 today, is that it is going to be very unit specific. So making sure that we're tailoring that to that individual environment. So I'm just going to talk about a bit of a case study then. So just to set the scenes, this particular unit is based up in Yorkshire. It takes weaners in at approximately sort of 7.5, 8 kilos on average. Obviously, that kind of average fluctuates throughout the years, you might expect, but on average, that's probably where they're sat. It's a fully slatted unit, automatically ventilated, and consists of 4 pens in each room. So in each pen, it holds about 100 pigs, JSR genetics, and the pigs stay in these buildings till probably about 7 to 8 weeks post-weaning, when they're transferred to the finisher building, which is also on site. So in each pen, as you can see on this picture here, you've got a couple of blue hox feeders, and they're also putting down sort of additional troughs for extra water when the pigs initially arrive on site. The pigs are fed a 3-stage, currently fed a 3-stage starter regime, and then they'll go on to a link diet around about sort of 15 kilos-ish live weight. From that point onwards, they're then fed a home mix ration up until slaughter. So in terms of what we looked at, this is just a slide demonstrating feeding quantities in the regime. So on the left-hand side in the green is the original before we started looking at zinc removal, and on the blue, on the right-hand side in the blue, that's obviously the regime that we implemented when looking at trialing. So all 3 diets had full rate zinc, and then there was also the addition of trimetazine in the first 2 diets, as you can see here. So our general approach really was to look at removing zinc from all the diets, and again that is on a case-by-case basis, so it doesn't necessarily always happen in that way, but in this particular one we did. And we looked at replacing the first stage diet with a zinc-free alternative. So you can see here that this is the first stage zinc-free, and diet, well, the second stage and third stage stayed the same. And I guess the reason really behind that was because we felt this was sort of the focus area. So we really wanted to promote and focus on gut health for the first sort of 7 to 10 days post weaning. After that, yeah, we felt those 2 diets would sit well as the follow-on. We kept the medication the same, and I think it's probably just worth noting here that, you know, we're certainly not suggesting that a zinc-free diet is going to replace the need for medication. You know, of course, we'd like to think that, you know, promoting health would in turn have a positive impact, but it's something we're definitely talking about with producers, with their vets, to make sure that we're obviously not increasing that usage either. We also looked at feeding a little bit more of the first stage diet, and that was mainly because the trials that we'd done elsewhere actually indicated that in some cases intakes were higher on a zinc-free diet. And again, as Sadie sort of mentioned, that may be down to sort of the palatability with zinc, but we just wanted to make sure that if it was higher, those pigs then weren't transitioning onto the second stage too soon. We wanted to kind of keep it a minimum of 7 days before they went on to the second stage. So observations then, what did we see? Well, we conducted these trials first or initially by running a bit of a small scale look-see trial. So we actually looked at just trialing zinc-free in one pen within a building rather than rolling it out across the whole site and all the pigs. And that was to kind of give us an indication as to how that was going to look, and make sure that there wasn't anything that we felt needed to be addressed. So once we've done that initial sort of look-see, we carried out then monitored trials, and we've been doing so over the sort of the last 5 to 6 months to actually capture performance and look at that in a bit more detail. So some of the initial feedback that we had when we first implemented the zinc-free diets was intakes were slightly higher. The other observation actually was the dung appeared slightly darker compared to the zinc diets, and also pigs maybe looked a little bit maybe slightly dirtier in appearance. So I don't know whether you can see this on your screens, but the top right photo are pigs on the zinc-free diet, and this photo here is those being fed zinc. And you can see that they still, you know, still look healthy, still look well, but these probably just look a little bit dirtier compared to these. And I think that's something we're probably seeing a little bit more, as you might expect, on fully slatted units compared to straw-based. In terms of fecal consistency, you know, both the zinc and the non-zinc pigs both, you know, measured within the normal parameters, I guess, at this sort of stage. As Sadie has also mentioned, there was maybe slightly less or slightly more looseness, I guess, on the zinc-free compared to the zinc, but certainly not at a level that would cause concern. And I've got a slide actually a little bit later on that will look at fecal consistency scores for a zinc and non-zinc diet. So in terms of growth performance, what we have seen, and in this particular scenario actually, and I'll caveat this, of course, with, you know, every single farm, every single situation is very different. So it's very challenging to predict the outcome for each scenario until we've actually, you know, gone on, had a looked at the factors that we might need to consider, and actually put some diets into place. But we have seen here, as you'll see, there's 2 graphs here. The left-hand side will show you the transfer weight. So this was from weaning up until about 8 weeks post-weaning. And you'll see here the transfer weights for zinc and zinc-free in the green were the same. On the right-hand side, you've got the average daily gain, and again from weaning to the same point in time. And again, those are pretty comparable. So for this particular unit, we looked at weighing the pigs at weaning. As you can see here, 8.32 and 8.4 as the pigs came in. And then we also weighed and monitored performance for the first 3 weeks post-weaning. And then again, when they transferred at about 7 to 8 weeks. So as I just sort of mentioned, the start weights are pretty comparable, but what you can see in the first sort of couple of weeks, that is very much in line with our zinc-free approach, and that's really focusing on this initial stage of promoting gut health rather than just pushing for growth, as we've obviously no longer got that safety net of zinc. So yeah, slight difference in growth in the first couple of weeks, but then what you can see here in this particular scenario is actually the pigs that were fed no zinc, or the zinc-free diet, should I say, actually came away heavier at 31.69 versus the 30.57 at transfer out of the nursery. So I think as well, what we have found here is, and something we'd probably encourage any producer looking at trialing zinc-free products or are looking to remove zinc, it's certainly worth looking at performance over a longer period of time. So rather than just looking at those initial stages, still do, but perhaps also capture it over a longer period of time to really understand the impacts of what's happening. So if you are transferring piglets out of the nursery at sort of 30-40 kilos, if we can also look at monitoring that, that may also be of interest. So fecal scoring then. So when we looked at fecal consistency for pigs fed zinc versus no zinc, there certainly wasn't a significant impact on both. What you will see here, obviously, is this is showing you the first week post-weaning, slightly higher on the no zinc, but certainly not above a level that we would be concerned about. And the same for sort of 2 to 3 weeks post-weaning here as well. And just to summarise, really, I started off the presentation reiterating the message that we've already had, that there is no silver bullet when it comes to sort of zinc removal. It's very much going to be a bit of a holistic approach. And of course, we acknowledge that obviously nutritional solutions will form part of that puzzle. We focused our zinc-free diets on ensuring that we're really supporting gut health, setting the pig up to really then maximise on the growth at the later stages. And today I've obviously shared a particular regime and results that it's generated, but in terms of what that solution looks like, it's going to be very unit specific. Hence the reason why we've developed our Nutricare package alongside our nutritional solutions to kind of, I guess, provide that joined up holistic approach, and certainly encouraging to work with vets in particular as well when you are looking to remove zinc. And yeah, just wanted to finish on that point really. I think regardless of the extension, we're certainly for farmers encouraging you as producers to approach your nutritionists, your feed suppliers, and start looking at these solutions earlier rather than necessarily leaving it until the deadline, because I do think it's going to be a bit of a process to be able to achieve that. And I think, yeah, that was me. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Emma. That was very informative. And once again, we'll take questions at the end.
Yeah.
So over to Phil. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay, Pat?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, let's just see if I can get this presentation to run as I expect it to. There we go. Fantastic. So yeah, hi, I'm Phil Baines. I'm an independent nutritionist that's been working in the industry for 30 years now, which is quite remarkable for me. And I'm going to talk about the fast-paced and helter-skelter world of water and its importance and how we're going to use it in acidification and ways to potentially help with the reduction and removal of zinc oxide. So first off, I'm going to talk about effectively the basics, quantity and quality of water, because as nutritionists, we know that water is most definitely the forgotten nutrient. And going on farm, you can see that in many situations where it is probably the least sort of nuanced part of pig nutrition. Now, as far as provision is concerned, we do have the Code of Recommendations of Welfare for the Livestock of Pigs as published by DEFRA. And we have, for each category and class of pigs, we have minimum daily requirements for each one of these classes. And certainly when you're looking towards the breeding herd, in many cases I find that these are under-provided, particularly in farrowing houses or dry sow houses and service house. I know that here, if you're looking at the lactating sow provision here, the suggestion is between 15 and 30 litres per day. But some work back in the early 90s from AHDB Terrington had sows on a regular basis drinking anywhere between 40 and 60 litres. Now, some of that may have been plain, but it gives an indication of the amount of water that is required for these animals. The publication obviously gives recommendations for minimum flow rates through nipple drinkers, but there are, as far as red tracts are concerned, different ones for bowls as well. Now, water is most definitely critical in terms of performance of a pig, because there is a fairly linear response in terms of water intake and feed intake, and generally it's around about or slightly higher than 2.5 times water intake equals feed intake. So if we have any form of restriction of water intake, we will have a restriction in feed intake. Now, if we have that restriction in feed intake, that's going to take longer to get to slaughter. It's going to have an impact on feed conversion ratios and economics. So it is pretty critical that we do pay attention to the amount of water that these pigs do have available. And in the graph, you can see that we have water minimum, water maximum guideline levels of water, and they are entirely in relation to each other. So moving on from that, we have the red tractor requirements here, which Hang
on, Phil, you've gone on mute for some reason.
Is that better?
That's much better, thank you.
I'm terribly sorry. What I was saying was incredibly important. So I shall start from where I left off here. So as far as the red tractor requirements, I think it's probably, for me, quite important to have a look at this part FW.3.B, which is flow rate is adequate and water pressure is appropriate for the class of pig. Now, we've seen, as far as DEFRA requirements are concerned, they have their recommendations for there. And what I often find is that flow rate can be far higher from a nipple or bite drinker than the pig can actually consume. So even though it does comply with the recommendations, we are effectively putting a restriction on intake because the pig physically can't actually drink the pressure of water that's coming out. It's basically blowing the tonsils out the back of their head. So that reduces feed intake and potential performance. Another critical one, which needs to be certainly considered, is the position of the drinker. So FW3.C, trough drinkers are suitably located and at an appropriate height for the class of pig. Now, pigs need distinctly separate regions for eating, drinking, dunging, urinating and sleeping. Ideally, the drinkers need to be close to the feed and in the exercise and defecating area, particularly in meal systems. When the pig has a mouthful of dry meal, it will quite often just champ away on a mouthful of food whilst walking to the drinkers. It'll drop food out of the mouth, which is very wasteful, reducing feed efficiency. So it's not a very useful thing to have the thing too far apart. So likewise, having a drinker in the line area can be a cause of contention and stress, particularly it could be another factor leading to behavioural vice as pigs clamber over themselves to actually try and get some water. So the positioning of these things is really quite important. Sometimes this can be lost. Moving on further in the red tractor requirements, again, the one that I want to really consider most here is the one that I've highlighted here, which is where water tests, particularly on borehole, which needs to be independently tested annually, where water test indicates coliform levels that are greater than 100 colony-forming units, or total viable count levels are greater than 1,000 colony-forming units per milliliter, there is evidence of action being taken to investigate and address bacterial contamination. Now, total viable counts can relate to bacteria, molds, yeasts in a sample, and it's not just restricted to one level of bacteria. Another bone of contention is when we're looking at things like gut microflora. When this document refers to coliforms, not all coliforms are E. coli, not all coliforms are pathogenic, but it is an indication of the level of control we need to be taken into consideration. Looking at the quality, well, now we've addressed the amount of water and where the water is going to be within a pen, I'm going to look at the quality of water. Now, for UK potable human drinking water standards, we actually follow the EU, so that hasn't changed. That hasn't changed at all. As for recommendations in terms of animal drinking water, they are few and far between. So we have to really sort of rely on the drinking water standards and DEFRA and the red tractor levels that give us an indication of what we're trying to put into these things. Now, within the drinking water standards, all water needs to have a certain level of dissolved minerals and trace elements in to support normal ionic balance of the body. If we were to drink and if we were to provide pure water, H2O, without impurities into our body or into a pig's body, it would actually drag minerals and elements out of the body, which would eventually lead to poor health and ultimately death. So we do need to have a certain level of almost contamination that is there. Now, the bottom part of this particular water standard there that we can see does talk about the red tractor bits, the total coliforms, the E. coli's, TVCs, etc. From a nutritional interest, we have iron, where within human drinking water, the maximum levels are 200 micrograms per litre. Now, iron in excess or much higher than this can lead to bacterial blooms within the water. So even though at the point of test we might have very low levels of total coliforms, or sorry, total viable counts, an excess amount of iron in that drinking water could lead to a bloom later on down the stream. Also more of interest at the moment is the level of chloride which is going into water. Now, chloride is a negative anion and reacts with positive cations such as potassium and calcium. So there is a line of thought that is thinking if we have excess chloride in the drinking water, that may have an impact on bone density and bone growth. So that is under further investigation. But there aren't that many criteria for us to actually use for recommendations for drinking water standards apart from the human side. Now, personally, I always assume that if I would eat the food, then it's good for the pigs. If I would drink the water, it's also good for the pigs. If I wouldn't drink the water, if it's likely to make me ill, it's likely to make the pigs ill as well. So, moving on to the piglet implications. I'm going to talk about acids and how acids can be used within the water to improve the situation, as well as part and parcel of the whole removal of zinc oxide. Acids can be grouped into two different descriptions: inorganic acids such as sulfuric acid, nitric acid, hydrochloric acid, and organic acids such as lactic acid, formic acid, and acetic acid. Both of these classifications fundamentally work in exactly the same way, and that is to provide an unbalanced hydrogen ion into an environment. The greater number of these hydrogen ions in an environment indicates the strength of the acid. Now, these hydrogen ions, as they're released into the environment, are very hungry, which is why they're trying to become balanced, and this is where they rip bits and pieces out of the environment, and that's how the acid works. Now, the difference between inorganic and organic acids is down to chemical definition, where organic chemistry is the study of molecules which are associated with carbon. That's the only difference between the two. Organic acids have carbon, inorganic acids don't have carbon. The most important acid, as far as we're concerned as humans and as far as pigs are concerned, is hydrochloric acid. It's a very simple molecule with a chloride atom bound to a hydrogen atom, and in a liquid environment the hydrogen atom is released, which causes the acid environment. So that is basically what we're going to look at as the most critical component for pigs at this point of view. Now, Sadie quite rightly talked about pepsin as the key component in protein digestion, and pepsin is a really interesting enzyme which is created in the body, in our bodies, in the pig's bodies. So when a pig consumes food, the digestive system utilizes multiple enzymes to break down components of the feed. Enzymes such as amylase, lactase, maltase, they break down cereals and sugars into molecules which are transferred from the lumen of the gut into the bloodstream. Now, critically for our discussion is this one, pepsin, which breaks down protein. It's the first protein digesting enzyme and critical to the whole process. Given that the body is a mass of protein, it's essential that it is initially created in an inactive form, because if it was produced in an active form, we would start digesting ourselves. Now, the inactive form is called Pepsinogen, which is produced by the chief cells in the stomach wall. Now, this inactive form needs to become activated, and the only way that becomes activated is a reaction with hydrochloric acid, which is produced the parietal cells in the stomach wall. These two working together then break down this first part of protein digestion. It then moves into the rest of the digestive system, and other enzymes break it down from peptides into amino acids, and then it goes into the rest of the bloodstream. I can show you quite well, this describes the situation quite well. We've got 3 different test tubes here with a meat sample in it. Now, on its own, hydrochloric acid will start to denature the proteins in any feed that's eaten. Indeed, the second one there, you can see that pepsin on its own will also work to help break down whatever protein is there. But all enzymes work within a strict pH environment. So the combination of the hydrochloric acid denaturing the proteins, as well as making the stomach more acidic, helps the pepsin to do its work and break down the proteins into soluble subunits for further digesting into the gut. So this hydrochloric acid, as you can see, is pretty critical. As Sadie also said, the problem with piglets is they don't have a particularly good way of producing hydrochloric acid. So a newborn piglet will only have a stomach pH of fairly neutral, just slightly acidic, of pH 5 to 6. Whilst it's suckling, that pH would be between 3.5 and 5. After weaning, still 3 to 5.5. Ideally, in an adult mature level, an empty gut pH is going to be between 2 and 3. And that's the same for us as well. So we really have to be mindful about the quality of protein that is being offered in the feed to avoid undigested protein entering the hind gut. And what we have here, just summarising it to a little bit degree, is that insufficient hydrochloric acid is secreted in the stomach for a post-weaned piglet. The pH of the piglet's stomach is higher than an adult one, so the feed ingredients have to be selected quite carefully. Now, the problem we also have with selecting proteins, fish meal, milk powders, is they have what's known as a high buffering capacity. So when a piglet eats these feed components, they actually suck up and neutralize some of the hydrochloric acid that's there, which is a fairly negative feedback, really. We don't want that to have happening. What we want to have happening is a reduction in pH, a greater acidity in the stomach, which converts pepsinogen into pepsin. So we have greater protein digestion. We have less undigested feed going into the hindgut, which is a reduced substrate for enteric pathogens, and an improvement in performance. It's a fairly straightforward process as far as proteins are concerned. We also have to consider what acid does for mineral digestion as well. And this is a quite a good example, is that hydrochloric acid not only plays a role in protein digestion, but also converts mineral salts into digestible ions. And the classic reaction is converting limestone into calcium and other components. So we have the acid here, 2HCl, plus the calcium. When they combine together, we have carbon dioxide, water, calcium, and chloride ions, which can be brought into the bloodstream. And from a human perspective, we can draw conclusions, or we can draw quite a nice example from Rennie, which are effectively calcium tablets. And they're advertised as Rennie will convert excess acid into water and other natural substances. Now, those other natural substances are burping from carbon dioxide. So that's how that one works. But I just wanted to draw that it's not all down to protein digestion, but we also need hydrochloric acid for mineral digestion as well. I'm going to move on to pig health. Now, this is a particularly healthy pig. I think this one's put on a few COVID pounds, and it was probably actually very, very tasty. So this is a graph that has been around for quite some time now. On the top line, we can see from a pH perspective, we have an acid at 1 and an alkaline or base at 14. So you've got a nice cross spectrum right across the range of typical pHs that we would find in any liquid environment. Underneath that, you can see that mold can tolerate a wide range of pHs, so it can be quite acidic to quite basic, and yet there are various types of molds that will quite happily proliferate in all of those kind of environments. The same thing with yeasts. Very similar in acid forming bacteria, so Bifidobacter and Lactobacilli that are in your gut, they need to be operating at low pHs, so they can actually regulate themselves quite well at pHs 2 and 3. The pathogenic species of bacteria that we're talking about, they have quite a narrow range of pHs that they can work to and proliferate in. So that's anywhere between a pH of 4 and a pH of 7. And as we've seen earlier on, a piglet has only really got a pH of anywhere between 3.5 and 5. So that really fits into that pathogenic bacterial niche. And we've got to think about how the hell we can control that. Now, as I say, water isn't pure, and over time we can get deposits of calcium and other minerals in the pipeline, as well as the drinking furniture in total. Now, this can reduce water flow, which is a bad thing, as well as tainting the water, reducing its palatability, and the volume drink, which again is a bad thing. So acidifying the water line helps dissolve some of these deposits, as well as improving palatability overall, and fairly straightforward. You can see the ends of the nipples here from a standard water untreated compared to an acidified system here, nice and clean, nice and bright. How do we actually get acid into the drinking water? Pretty straightforward, really. There are two main ways of doing it. We can use a passive system such as an acid providing dosatron. The example here is in an outdoor system where the water is being provided straight through the top of the acid tank. Acid is being drawn up by the dosatron, and then acidified water is being put out to the rest of the pigs within the paddocks. Or you can use an indoor system, or another indoor system we can use is something like the Select Doser 640, which is a peristaltic pump, operates in pretty much the same way to provide the right level of acidification into water lines. All very good, all fairly straightforward. Technology is there. But there is a big but here, is that just by putting acid into water isn't necessarily the cure, because you might end up with all sorts of really horrible problems as well. Now, this comes down to different types of bacteria that we have in the world. We have two types of bacteria. We have gram-positive bacteria, which was characterized by Hans Christian Joachim Gram in 1884, and we have gram-negative bacteria. Now, the ones that we normally target, such as Salmonella, E. coli, Listeria, they are all gram-negative bacteria. They're more like pancakes. They're nice and floppy. They're relatively straightforward to kill. Now, the gram-positive bacteria, they've got a hard shell on the outside. They're more like a Smartie. Now, once we acidify an environment, that hard shell is quite difficult to get through. So we need to have other products within the water that help to break through or punch holes within that gram-positive shell. Now, they can be things like monoglycerides, they can be essential oils. But when you put in oils and water together, that's quite tricky, because the two don't mix particularly well. So there is some technology available now which helps break down these gram-positive bacteria, because we end up potentially with slime mold problems. Now, anybody who's acidified their water lines is probably quite well aware of these situations here. When we go back to our water quality slides earlier on, we can see that total viable counts have to be less than 1,000 colony forming units per milliliter, which means there are components there which will be compliant with all the water standards that we require. But if we've killed off a certain section of the bacteria, so we've killed off all of the gram-negative bacteria with our acid, the gram-positive bacteria that's left can now use all of these minerals and other organic matter that's in that water to grow. It's a nice little growth medium. And you'd find that there's a lot of these gram-positive bacteria will quite happily proliferate and produce this slime mold. So as a nice example we have here, this was just taken out of a drinker and put on the floor. This was one that was actually sent yesterday as an example of slime mold within a dosatron unit. And here is an outdoor unit using a a ballcock mechanism. And on the top here, you can see that all of this is just this gram-positive Enterococcus faecium slime mold, which is on top of the water. This can then quite happily and merrily block all of the nipple drinkers that are there, and instead of creating a really nice acidified water that we know is going to be of benefit to the pigs, we end up with giving the pigs absolutely no water whatsoever. So really have to think about that. Now, we've talked about water quality, but we also need to think about the hardness of the water, because once we acidify water, if it's coming from a limestone aquifer, this can buffer the amount of acid that's there. So even though we might be looking for a pH of 4 within our drinking water, 3.8 to 4 pH in drinking water once we've acidified it, by the time we've actually got to the end of the water line, because of the amount of limestone that's present in that water, it's been buffered. So by the end of the drinking line, we might be at a pH of 7. So we have to really think about water quality and knowing what's happening as far as the acidification process is concerned. Now, we also know that acidifying water doesn't immediately kill bacteria. So we need to consider the time difference between once we've acidified the water and when it reaches the pig, because there may be not enough time from dose to drink to actually kill any waterborne pathogens there anyway. So whatever we're doing, it's another thing to really take in mind when we're looking at borehole water and the level of filtration and other processes that we're putting in line to keep any pathogenics or even commensal bacteria low enough. And a third one that I'm thinking about here is for a passive system like a dosatron, it takes a certain flow of water before it will activate the pumping system. So generally you need around about 200 piglets post-weaning in an area will actually do this. So all of the piglets drinking there should activate the dosatron system. Costs. Now this is an example because there's a lot of acids available on the market. Not all the acids are going to be pertinent to any individual situation, because as I said, when you're looking at the water samples, you may have various different types of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria to take into consideration. But in this example, an acid available on the market would be around about £1.95 a litre. A typical dose to take the water from pH of 7 neutral to a pH of between 3.8 and 4, which is the ideal situation that we're looking for. It's right on the edge of this pathogenic proliferation period. You're looking at 2 litres per 1,000 litres of drinking water. So the cost is around about £3.90 per 1,000 litres of water. Now the cost per litre, okay, let's do the maths, is down to 0.39 pence per litre. The period of application that I would suggest is around about 3 weeks post-weaning, because 3 weeks post-weaning, the piglets should have started to develop sufficient endogenous production of hydrochloric acid for them to be able to convert this pepsinogen into pepsin and provide enough for protein digestion. So over a 3-week period, and if we can consider that water consumption will be around about 2.5 times the feed intake. 2.5, I'm expecting over 3 weeks post-wean 500 grams of feed a day, there or thereabouts. So in terms of average water over those 3 weeks, we're looking at 1.25 litres per pig per day, and that will give us 26.25 litres over that 3-week period, which costs 10p per pig. Now I think at 10p per pig, in terms of the potential that it will then benefit from, is well worth the investment. So, conclusions. Acid will help fight against the invading pathogens by both pH and other invasive methods. Now, acid will help with protein and mineral digestion, thereby improving performance. Not all acids are the same. So blends of acids tend to perform better than individuals, and you would find that water acidification and in-feed acidification will work incredibly well, but the in-feed will only work if the pig actually eats it. So we need the water for the feed to be consumed, and the two will work synergistically. This is the final slide. So water acidification is shown to have very good cost-effective benefits in the post-weaned pig. The effects of water acidification can be variable. impact of water acidification depends on the water quality to start with. And I think really, even if we don't look at water acidification, really just check out the quality of the water that we're putting into these pigs. The flow rate, the dwell time, and the palatability of that water is also going to be critical. And acids will continue to be one element in pig health and nutrition, and the removal of zinc oxide. But I personally think it's probably going to be one of the most important to make sure that that water environment, water provision, water quality is going to help out on this zinc removal. So discuss it with your nutritional consultant, discuss it with your vet, and that's me done.
Thank you very much, Phil.
Okay.
I have just popped a couple of links in the chat function with regards to some of the AHDB water that we've got on our website. Thank you very much, and over to you, Lauren.
Thanks very much. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
So hi, I'm Lauren Dimmock from the Health and Welfare team, and I'm just going to give a very quick summary of the changes ahead, and some of which we've just heard, and then take a sort of step back and look at the farm approach in reviewing, some of the simple stuff, and how the simple stuff really does make a difference in the removal of zinc oxide. So first of all, to quickly summarise, as Sadie said, the latest update means that any zinc already in the supply chain, or in the supply chain by June the 26th, can be used until the end of its shelf life, which is approximately 2 years. And then this should very much be treated as a transition period. So it's an opportunity to explore alternative options, and it mustn't be perceived as an extension to just carry on as normal. So now is the time, sort of as all my all the presenters before me have said, to work closely with your vet, nutritionist and feed company, and make sure you've got a specific plan for your unit so that you can phase zinc out and zinc oxide out without compromising health and welfare. So everyone said it, but the approach really does need to be holistic, and we need to consider all the risk factors that might cause post-weaning diarrhea and how they're tackled. So that's from maximising colostrum intake in the very early days and making sure we've got piglets have developed that immunity, to regularly reviewing cleaning and disinfection protocols to make sure that we're not exposing pigs to bacterial viruses that could derail them at this critical point. And as we've discussed, there really is no single solution to mitigate the removal of zinc oxide, but if you can optimise gut health, maintain good biosecurity and manage colostrum efficiently, and look at sort of that shield as your overall sort of armoury, I guess, to approaching the removal, then it is possible to remove it successfully without compromising health and welfare. So sorry for the blocks of colour on this slide, but the main message is that obviously weaning is undoubtedly one of the most stressful times in the pig's life, and our main goal is to reduce some of these stresses. So there's a lot going on at weaning, going from the familiarity of the sow's milk, being able to access that as and when wanted, to having to search for new solid food in a new environment, learning to navigate that new environment and system, along with mixing with others, changes in temperature, and just generally perhaps being handled for the first time and then moved. There's a lot of stresses, and anything we can do to minimise those really are going to make a difference. So nothing on this slide is particularly sexy or novel as such, but it is a reminder that the basic stuff here really can save time and money in the long run. And if we can get the pigs set up well at weaning, they will, develop going forwards to be strong and sturdy, and hopefully we won't see so many challenges. So in terms of a couple of examples of things we could do before weaning, looking at hitting target weaning weights. So obviously the robust pig will be much better equipped to take on the new environment and the challenges associated. Making sure that pigs are familiar with solid food before weaning, so they're used to eating and it's not a shock to their system and doesn't upset the gut. And then reviewing and tweaking where necessary the cleaning and disinfection protocols. So preventing opportunities for bacteria and viruses to take hold, as that really will derail them at this critical stage. So then looking on to the new environment, having easy access to water, as Phil has mentioned, pigs that drink more will eat more. Providing some extra feeding space, so feed that's easy to find will be more readily eaten, and ensuring that temperature and light is right too, so too hot and too cold and pigs are less likely to eat, and then the same if it's too dark. Robust piglets and pigs are better equipped to deal with the challenges in later life, and making this sort of transition as smooth as possible will pay off. So although it may seem overwhelming, these are the real simple, sort of getting the simple bits right now really will have a big impact and make quite a big difference. So there are lots of resources available on the AHDB website. You might have already come across the Colostrum is Gold campaign, but that gives some really useful guidance and advice on feeding colostrum and some useful protocols. There are all the biosecurity protocols there. So if you're looking to review your cleaning and disinfection, if you're looking at the staff training for vehicles, anything like that. You may also be familiar with the muck-free truck campaign or heard me talking about that previously. But very similar rules apply to vehicles, and any risk of vehicles and people coming onto farm, making sure those protocols are tight and reducing the risks for bacteria and viruses to enter. Anyone that's having contact with these pigs, they all pose a risk, and it's worth reviewing them at the same time. So there's a couple of links there in terms of colostrum management, nutrition guidance. I think Pat's just put the removing zinc oxide guidance document up there as well in the chat, but they're all available on the website. You can also order posters and training materials through the website, but if you've got questions on resources or you're looking for more resources, then please do get in touch. I've put the Pig Health inbox email address at the bottom there. And that's it from me. I'm going to hand back to Pat for questions.
Thank you very much, Lauren. We do have some questions in the chat box. So if I start at the top, from John, just a quick question. Was there any disease monitoring done during your on-farm trials? If so, what did you find during the trials? I believe, and I'm just trying to look at the time to see who was on at that point.
I think that was
Sadie,
me.
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I suppose it stands for any of the feed companies, really, or anybody else that's done any zinc-free trials. I was just curious to know, really, that was all.
Yeah, so from Primary's point of view, I wouldn't say that we've kind of done routine monitoring, because obviously there are kind of rapid tests available. What we tend to have done is where we've identified a potential issue, is then tested to see what's on farm, or if we've already known that potentially there has been an E. coli challenge previously, then that's been monitored. But it is definitely something that that could be considered, and I know there's a few tests out there that will allow kind of rapid detection of various challenges.
Go on. Sorry.
So I was going to say, but certainly what we've seen in the cases where we have had issues, it tends to be E. coli.
That's fair enough. Did you do any further digging, or did you just know it wasn't E. coli? Did you have a specific strain or anything like that?
Yeah, they were typed. Honestly, I'd have to go back and check with individual units, but we did have the strains typed where it was identified.
Lovely. No, that's fine. And what did you find, just out of interest? Sorry, this is my new job, and I'm learning all the time, so I apologise.
Sorry, in terms of what?
Which E. coli types did you find on farm, or which were most prevalent?
If I'm honest, when we found them, I think we've had again, I can't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to double check. But we have had kind of a couple of the common strains. But what I would say is that where we've tested, it's been a bit of a chicken and egg situation. So we've tested because we've had an issue, and I'm always just a bit conscious that if you're doing more regular monitoring, would you pick up some of those, the likes of E. coli that are present on farm anyway, but not necessarily causing an issue? So it's just something to consider.
No, that's fair enough. I didn't know if you'd done any, because certainly when I was selling creep feed you go on and you talk on farm and bits and pieces. Some people would suffer from sort of seasonal edema and all those sorts of bits and pieces. I didn't know if you saw any of that whilst you were doing it, various trials at different times of year and what have you. So yeah, I didn't know. That was my only sort of question, really.
Thank you very much. This is from Hannah. Thanks for a great presentation, Sadie. Do you think the lower CP diets will be a short-term move until the industry has removed some of the other health issues on farm, immunity, etc., as you mentioned? This has been seen in countries like Netherlands, where they took zinc out soon after the ban.
Yeah, I guess possibly would be the answer to that. You know, if we can, and there will be some farms, I suspect, that we could, you know, keep higher crude protein levels, you know, and not see an issue with zinc oxide removal. But I suspect they'll kind of be few and far between. I think we really do, in a lot of places, need to lower that crude protein to be that little bit safer. It's not to say in the future we won't increase it. However, often when we're reducing those crude proteins, we're reducing things like soya, which has other kind of benefits to consider. So it's probably early days to see if we're going to do that, but I guess it's a possibility that we may go slightly higher again.
Yeah. This probably maybe you and Emma can answer this between you. This comes from Dan. I stopped using, and I would say I've had this from 2 other producers as well. I stopped using zinc in 2016, replacing it with oregano or seaweed, according to the diet age of the piglets. Are there any other products that might be worth considering?
I mean, so from my point of view, that, you know, and as I kind of touched on my presentation, there are a lot of additives on the market, and I just always like to kind of urge a little bit of caution, because, you know, essentially as a nutritionist and as a feed company, it's our job to do feed trials. So we do a lot of trials on, you know, looking at additives, looking at the best combination of additives in our feed. And what those trials allow us to do, for example, is to have the necessary controls in place, so we can have a diet that doesn't have that additive, that has zinc oxide. We can have a diet that doesn't have the additive and doesn't have zinc oxide as well. And what that often allows us to do is to say, well, okay, do you even need that additive to begin with? And then you can look at building kind of an optimum profile. So I would just first of all say, I urge caution with additives. They absolutely have a place, but please do use the kind of the knowledge and the experience that your nutritionists have and the data that they have. But if I'm looking towards groups of additives that we are finding useful, you know, as Phil kind of touched on, in feed acidification, so looking at products like benzoic acid, which the majority of diets in the UK do contain anyway, but, you know, there certainly is a place for those really basic additives that I would consider things like phytase, like cereal enzymes, which again a lot of the feed manufacturers will be using anyway. But I guess more your not standard additives would be things like medium chain fatty acids. Actually, they do definitely give some good results, as we've already touched on probiotics. But again, a lot of, you know, some of these can be feed specific, depending on what's already in the feed, and also potentially farm specific. So it really is quite a minefield to kind of try and work through. So please kind of do use the knowledge of people in the industry where we can to try and guide you on some of those products.
Yeah. That was quite a comprehensive answer. Have you got anything to add?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, it's perfect, Sadie. No, I would just, you know, echo exactly what Sadie said. You know, if you are looking at trialing any additives, I definitely would speak to your feed supplier to have that kind of conversation, to maybe better understand, you know, what's currently sat within those existing diets and how that might complement or might already be covered. And again, they might also be able to kind of assist you if you do want to go down that route, how you can look at sort of assessing that and monitoring it on your unit if you decide you want to go down that route. But yeah, no, that's very comprehensive.
Thank you. Question for Phil. What are the implications for baseline drinking water pH at 6.5 and over when it comes to adding effective levels of supplementary acid, if any?
Well, I feel like the Prime Minister, where I thank the honourable gentleman for his question at this time. Thanks, Kev. Yeah, the answer is realistically every level of drinking water that comes from a borehole will have a different level of pH. The ultimate level of pH that we're looking for when it gets to the pigs is between 3.8 and 4. So the amount of exogenous acid that we're actually putting into that water can vary farm by farm. So it will depend on who's supplying the acid to monitor the pH either by litmus papers or various other. You can get some nice, I think, the exotic fish tank pH measurements you can get on Amazon or other reputable suppliers. But ultimately, the indicated level that I put on that presentation of 2 litres per 1,000 is an indicator. So if we've got a hard water area of greater than a pH of 7 with a lot of limestone in there, chances are we might have to use 3 litres of acid. If we're in a more acidic environment like that 6.5 pH where the water's potentially filtered through a peat bog before it actually gets to the pig, we might only need 1.5 litres. So it really is situation specific and will require testing. If we have 2 litres going into this baseline level at 6.5, the water's potentially going to become too acidic. It'll become vinegary and the piglets won't want to drink it, in which case then we reduce feed intake and all the other nasties that come around to it. Likewise, if we're only using 2 litres in a hard water area, it's not enough, and potentially we're going to end up with slime mold because we're not actually we're not controlling both either the gram negatives or the gram positive bacteria. So the question is very fair and it's right, but each situation is quite specific. So whoever's supplying the acid really needs to monitor what's happening on the water quality and the end product in the drinker.
Thank you very much. How, probably this would be for Emma or Sadie again, how effective would apple vinegar in feed be for acid intake for a small holder with outdoor pigs?
Yeah, I personally haven't had any experience of that. So Sadie, I don't know whether you can cover that one off, but yeah, apologies.
I guess when we're looking to include acidification in feed, it's the products that we use have got more than one mode of action. So if you're looking for something like a benzoic acid, then it's working in a number of different ways. Whereas I think if you use something like apple cider vinegar, and I must admit it's not something that we've looked at, but I'm not sure that it would potentially cover the different modes of actions that other acidifying products have. So yeah, I mean, I think Phil's got his hand up, so you may be able to add something else to that.
Yeah, it's really consideration. I think the answer is I like the use of apple cider vinegar. Apple cider vinegar is touted on lots of websites of being the panacea for everything in human health. It would also be very good for pigs, but the problem is you have to make sure that it's been registered as a feed material, because if you are feeding it without the appropriate licensing, it's illegal. If it's illegal, you will not be able to market your pigs. So from a nutritional perspective, I think it's a good idea. Unless it's actually got feed materials assurance scheme qualification, you can't and shouldn't be using it.
Thank you very much. And another one for you, Sadie. How popular are you?
To make my own.
How there is a school of thought that promotes the attributes of fineness of wheat bran particle size for weaned piglets, but you cited that Francis Smollett's work, what specified coarse bran. Which do you think is preferable, and why might that be?
Yeah, and what I would say is that obviously I've discussed that we use wheat bran, and certainly we have tested it in terms of its coarseness or its fineness, whichever way you look at it, and there is always variability within that as well, so it's not necessarily always consistent in what you would classify it as. However, it's something that we have consistently seen a benefit of, and that is with fluctuations in its whether it is, as I said, more classified towards the coarse end or the fine end. Yeah, so I mean, from that point of view, I think I'd be leaning more towards coarse, but that isn't to say you can't still see the benefit with fineness. And it may be that actually it depends on the level of the challenge, for example, as to when you see the particular benefit of maybe the coarseness of the product or not. Yeah, so it's not, I suppose, not really a straightforward answer there, but certainly for something that we consistently see and do monitor in terms of our wheat bran.
Super. Probably one for Phil. Have used from Michael. Have used acid and hydrogen peroxide concurrently, those separate doses, which has worked well to control gram plus VE slime.
I'll keep the answer nice and quick. Great. There you go.
Well, that was quick. I don't appear to have any more questions at the moment, but if anyone's got one, feel free to put your hand up. For any producers that are here, I have put the link to log in to register your vote on how your levy's spent in the chat. And in the next day or two, I will be sending a feedback form out. If you could just take the time to fill it in, be much appreciated, because we can base what our next pig clubs and how we run them about on your, what your feedback is. So if there is no other questions, or if anyone wants to discuss anything else, feel free. Doesn't look like we do. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much to the 4 panelists. I thought it was very informative, very useful. And if anyone can think of any other questions in the meantime, after we've finished, feel free, email, and we'll try and find an answer and get back to you. And if there are any producers in that need help with logging in for their vote, get in touch with their local AHDB rep, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to help. So on the back of that, thank you very much. Speak to you all before too long.
Thanks, Pat.
Cheers. Thank you very much,
Thank
Emma,
you.
Sadie, Phil.
Thank you.
And Lauren. Thank you. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.